My first Sunday at Grace, Fran Kirkpatrick came up to me and handed me an annotated list of all the shut-ins that needed to be visited. It included their names, telephone numbers, family in the congregation, connections. It even gave a brief history of their situation, why they were now shut in, what had happened. Gave a list of conversation starters for each one, what their likes and stories were. And then most importantly in those days, because we're talking prior to GPS, directions to their house. As I read down the list, I noted interesting things about each of them. And I got to the last name on the list, and that's what it was a name. Guy McCullough. No phone number, no address. I said, Fran, is there another page to this? Because there's no information for Guy McCullough. She says, I know. I said, no phone number, no address? Nope. You don't know how to get to his house? Nope. So I started asking around the congregation. Nobody seemed to really know Guy McCullough. Some had, oh yeah, I think I remember him. But obviously no one knew the way to his house. I wasn't sure what to do. So I just waited. And then one day, a couple months later, I'm standing in the kitchen of the parsonage, and there's a knock at the back door. I open it, and here's this tiny little guy, looks a lot like a leprechaun with that twinkle in his eye. And he announces to me, I'm Guy McCullough. And I thought it was about time that I came to meet the pastor. I said, guys, I am so glad to finally get to meet you. How do I get to your house? Can you tell me the way? Nope. What do you mean? I can't get you there. Best I can do is you go to the Curlsville Road and go until you reach the crossroads. And there'll be an old Presbyterian church at the crossroads. Hang a right. Go back there a couple miles and just ask somebody. They all know where I live. They'll get you there. Okay. I grew up in the country. I figured, what the heck? I could do that. And so one bright, sunny afternoon, I got in the car and went to go see Guy McCullough. I found the Curlsville Road and the Presbyterian Church. Drove back a few miles, stopped at the first house, said, I'm looking for Guy McCullough. Can you tell me where he lives? Who? Never heard of him. So I drove a few more miles, stopped at the next house. Same thing. Who? Well, this wasn't going well. So I drove around a little more, stopped a few more houses. Same reaction. Who? Nope. McCulloughs. I think they live over so-and-so, And that kept happening. And I drove literally for about 3 hours that afternoon on the back roads, somewhere between Sligo, Reimersburg, and Clarion. I'm not sure even today where all I was. I did know I ran into a few old strip mine jobs, now abandoned. I had one road that literally turned into a cow path. That was fun. The long and short was I just drove around in circles and confusion, stopping every once in a while and asking, and I'm not sure. Yeah, the McCulloughs. Oh, gee, where do they live? I used to know a so-and-so McCullough. It was crazy. I was about ready to give up, but I really wasn't sure where I was or how to get home. So I decided next house I'd stop and ask directions. If nothing else, how to get back to Clarion. And there was this guy painting his house. That's a good one. Maybe he knows. So I stopped and he said, "Can I help you?" I said, "I'm looking for Guy McCullough." He lets out a laugh and turns around and says, "Yep, you found him." I have no idea how I got there, but I found him. We had a wonderful visit. And I learned a valuable lesson. Life is a lot like driving the back roads of Clarion County. It's really confusing and chaotic at times, and we kind of bumble our way through, not really knowing the way, but somehow getting somewhere, often by accident. And particularly in matters of faith, we kind of bumble our faith journey, hoping that we'll get somewhere where we're supposed to be. But we're not really sure what that looks like. In John's Gospel, Jesus says that he is the way, the truth, and the life. We've done some interesting things with that text over the centuries of the church and even down to our own time. Kind of an exclusivistic reading of it. But we also use that particular text often at funerals, primarily because of its opening line, "In my Father's house there are many rooms." If it was not so, Jesus says, would I have told you? And even now, I go to prepare a place for you. And you know the way to the place where I'm going. And Thomas says, hey, wait a minute, Jesus. We don't have a clue where you're going. How can we know the way? And Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. The way I've used that text, and the way many have used that text, is that Jesus is the way to heaven, God's house. As I was working on this text for today, I realized that Jesus is not talking about a place when he talks about God's house. Everywhere else in John's Gospel, that word that we translate in this text, house, is really household. It's the people of God. Amongst the people of God, there are many sanctuaries, temples, many places where we will find God's presence. In the midst of the household, God shows up in many forms, housed in many people. And that's so hard sometimes for us to see. And that's why Jesus makes that clear statement at the end, I am the way. Because until we begin to look at our relationship with God through the eyes of grace, that God's relationship with us is a gift, we're left with a transactional God. The Santa Claus God. If I'm a good boy, Christmas will be good. If I'm a bad boy, it's cold in the stocking. And we do the same thing with God. If I'm good, I'll get to heaven. If I'm bad, I'll go to hell. And that works for most of us to get through. It gets us doing the right things, believing the right things, hanging out with the right people. That seems to be the right way. And as long as everything's going well, it works. But then our spouse suddenly dies, or a child drops dead, or a gunman opens up in the mall, or a tornado devastates the town, and our lives are turned upside down by the many experiences of chaos and confusion. How do we make sense then? That's when the why questions, why God? I've been good. Why is this happening to me? And we do one of two things. We either blame God, and in most cases then walk away, or we blame ourselves. Somehow we've screwed up. That transactional God will bring us death every time in our walk of faith. It is only when we begin to recognize that this God, this crazy God, who would literally come to earth in human form, like you and me, that we might know God, that we might find the way to God, to see him in the midst of the ordinary, the crazy, the broken, that this God continues to walk with us in those dark valleys, even under the shadow of death, that shows up again and again in that household of God around us, in those many sanctuaries and temples, in those many crazy guises, that we might have companions in the midst of chaos, that we may have those who walk with us, care for us, show us God's love in those many simple ways, that we may be reassured in the midst of our doubts, in our fears, in the midst of the whys, that in the midst of despair we might find hope. In the midst of brokenness we might find healing. In the midst of death we may see signs of life. Jesus is the way to begin to see God's true presence, not just in heaven, but here amongst us, that we might have life and have it abundant.